Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of ModGear. This week, I'm driving the Nissan 350Z, an all-time favorite car for tuners and car enthusiasts alike. So, let's just get right into it, shall we? But before we begin this week's episode, let's take a step back in the past for a brief history lesson. In order to understand the history behind the 350Z, we need to understand Nissan's Z line of cars. And, I don't sound weird saying that Z cars are like zombie cars, no, they're not that. The Z line of cars that Nissan made, in a nutshell, was basically a performance package to pre-existing cars at the time. So these could be things like the 240SX, the 300ZX, cars like these that had Z's in their name. Many of these performance packages offered giant brand spanking new, I know, offered giant Brembo brakes, and also offered a power boost as well as some weight reduction. Basically, it's the typical track-like setup, but it's not a track-like setup. I know, that doesn't make any sense. But this is actually where the 350Z's story comes from. Let's now imagine this. The year is 1996. Yeah, it's that year. And the Nissan 300ZX, an all-time favorite tuner car from the 90s, had just come off the US market, because, Nissan decided to be a brilliant idea to pull the car off the market. Nissan wanted to replace the 300ZX in some kind of way. And the first idea that they wanted to do was they went back to their 240Z concept car. Because after all, Nissan wanted to keep the Z name alive. The 240Z concept was, well, as the name entails, was basically a modern version of the very well-known 240Z car, the JDM, the Drifter, you get the point. Unveiled in 1999, it had a small 2.4-liter four-cylinder, and it was making around 200 horsepower. Mind you, that engine was from the current Nissan Altima at the time. So what we're getting at is, you could buy a car with an engine from a normal family sedan. Yeah, that's totally sounding perfectly normal. Unfortunately, Nissan and a lot of critics didn't really like the car, nor the engine. And so, Nissan went back to the drawing board to see if they could come up with a new car and a new look to keep the Z name alive. And so, in the year 2002, Nissan once again came back out, and, well, that was when the 350Z was born. However, this time, rather than using a measly 2.4-liter four-cylinder, the 350Z had something a bit better under its belt. And this was the very well-known VQ35DE engine. That, of course, being a V6, hence the name I can't speak apparently. The 3.5 in the engine's name signifies for 3.5 liters. A 3.5 liter V6 powers this car, making somewhere around 270 at its lowest to 310 horsepower at its highest. For a car like this, it's actually a pretty healthy amount for a two-seater sports car, and it was a very well-known car in the car community as it was very easy to work on and they go for very cheap. Over the course of the 350Z's run, the car didn't really change that much, but there was quite a lot of special editions, things like Nismo variants and lots of Z variants, let's be honest here. But all cars have to come to an end, and in 2009, the 350Z had ceased production and was replaced by the more modern 370Z. Today, the 350Z is widely well known as one of the very first cars you can get your hands on if you're a car enthusiast and want to start getting into the tuning scene. It's a car that's very easy to work on with parts that are always around, because again, they're everywhere. They are practically everywhere. And all around, it's light, it's fast, and has a really good sounding, I can't speak. And it has a very good sounding engine. But anyway, that's basically all the history for the 350Z. So, with that history lesson out of the way, we can get to this week's episode. Take it away, Panda! Thank you, Mr. History Panda, and with that, we can begin today's tests, starting with a top speed test. Welcome to the Genesis 1 mile dragway. It's a place where many cars come to push their engines, and well, a lot of their speed, actually, to their limit, simply to put their speed onto the boards. Let's see how the 350Z can do in this test. The Z, 350Z or Fairlady Z, whichever one you want to call it, topped out at a surprisingly high 95.3 miles per hour. But much like the RX-7 from last week, the 350Z can definitely keep accelerating, providing it had a much longer runway, and it could probably keep going upwards of 100 miles per hour or more. But still, a very good run either way. Next up is the break-tastically fun brake test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to make sure that the car can stop all 4 of its brakes once it passes this white line. The goal is to not hit the parked Nissan Leaf, and if you do, you want to measure your distance based on how far the Nissan Leaf moves from its parking spot. So, let's see how the 350Z can do in this test. The Z does have very slippery brakes, much like the RX-7, but it actually didn't do as bad as I expected. So, therefore, a solid run from the 350Z. Next up is the very famous cornering test, and to do that, I've come here. This is the Forksville Test Circuit. Developed by the ModGear development team, it's used to help judge a car's endurance on tight corners, tight bends, and jumps, to help judge how a car can perform on a track-focused setting. So, let's see how the 350Z can do in the cornering test. The 350Z does surprisingly well in the corners. My only major complaints are is that the likelihood of a spin-out are pretty high, as again, this car's weight is very, well, low for a car like this, and it is, again, quite slippery. And the turning radius does feel a bit heavy, and you definitely do feel like you have to turn in a little bit earlier if you want to turn in at the right time, because turning in too late is probably going to make you hit a sidewalk or a wall or something like that. But other than that, it's a pretty awesome run for the 350Z. Next up is the very much parking a lot parallel park test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to make sure that we can park the car in between these two parked Renault Meganes. However, we also want to make sure that someone can walk behind the car and the front of the car. So let's see how the 350Z can do in this test. And with ease, the 350Z passes the parallel park test. Next up is the hillside of the gravel road segment. The goal of this test is very straightforward. We want to see how cars can perform on day-to-day conditions, whether this be bumps or potholes or just random cracks in a road that can help judge how a car's suspension works. So let's see how the 350Z can do in this test. The 350Z doesn't really ride that great. You're definitely going to feel a lot of bumps, and you're definitely going to feel that you're definitely being rocked around constantly. While the undercarriage of the car doesn't actually get hit by much, what I was surprised by was that the suspension travel for a car like this is actually pretty impressive. It's an okay-ish run from the 350Z, but I really hoped there was high potential here. Next up is the bumpy ride of the bump test. The goal of this test is also very simple. We want to see how cars can perform on large bumps as well as small ones, whether this be speed humps or just very large bumps in roads, similar to that into day-to-day conditions. So let's see how the 350Z can do in this test. The 350Z did, well, quite terrible in this test. The undercarriage of the car was constantly hitting the bumps, and there was actually a few sparks at some point towards the end of the test, and I actually had to reset the car itself because it had gotten stuck on some of the bumps, which you'll see later in this test. So, a very, very unfortunate run from the 350Z. Next up is the very well-known slalom test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to judge and make sure how well a car's body roll and cornering can affect it while in cornering. We already know sort of how well the 350Z can do in this test, but we're going to test it anyway to get a better perspective. So let's see how well the 350Z can do. Surprisingly enough, the 350Z once again does very well in the corners, but things like a wide turning radius definitely make it struggle when going around tight corners. Body roll is basically non-existent, and a loss of speed while cornering is very much not there. So, therefore, a very good run from the 350Z. The MPG figures that the 350Z actually gets are relatively similar to the RX-7 from last week, with an average of 17 miles per gallon in the city and 23 in the highway. Again, they're not the greatest for a car like this, but hey, for even a car like this, it's still quite impressive. However, how do these figures apply on the track? And now, let's give the 350Z an official lap around the Futaro circuit. The official standard time is 2:23:22. With added up accidents and collisions, the final adjusted time is 2:37:22.
The fuck?
Hey! Shut up!
God fucking damn it! disappeared.
Let's get the fuck out of here right now.
Oh my god!
It's raping time.
Run.
Oh shit! Oh shit!
Denied. Denied.
Fuck him up!
Run, bitch! Run!
Holy shit! Fuck him up!
Ah! Jesus Christ! Oh fuck! Oh, Todd! Fire! Fire!
Oh shit! Oh shit! Fuck him up!
The fuck is that?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine. You're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they never understand.
What the fuck?
they ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not.
Hasta la vista,
You can't get into
baby.
it because they would never understand.
So, what are my final thoughts on the Nissan 350Z? Well, to start, it's actually a very great car. It can definitely reach very high speeds, upwards of to 100 miles per hour or more. Its cornering is a bit questionable because of its heavy turning radius, but for a lack of body roll, how well it parks and overall launch and acceleration is very good. It's a car that many tuners and car enthusiasts will recommend that you take for your very first car, and is surprisingly usable from day-to-day conditions as long as you're not going over complete bumps. If you're in the area looking for a new car or a tuning car to help you get started, then this car is definitely a good option as your first one. I'd highly recommend this to basically anyone out there because again, while it may be a tuner or car enthusiast car, it's also a very good car for day-to-day use, whether that being to the grocery store and stuff like that. But anyway, on that awesome note, it's time to end. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night.